Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the top stories first. In Afghanistan, 11 civilians and Afghan troops have been killed in a series of attacks across the country. The government has blamed the Taliban for the violence. Meanwhile, a statement by the group said nearly 100 civilians were killed or wounded in government attacks over the past 2 weeks. The US says any terrorist attack on the military drawdown troops or allies in Afghanistan will be met very forcefully. At a news conference, Pentagon spokesperson John Kirby said Washington is well aware of Taliban threats. Kirby said it would be imprudent for the US not to take these threats seriously. In Myanmar, protesters in Yangon Commercial District have welcomed the parallel unity government to confront the military. Meanwhile, security forces shot dead 2 demonstrators in the ruby mining town of Mogok. Myanmar has been in upheaval since the military ousted Aung San Suu Kyi, with the junta killing 728 people. China says talks between the US and Japan have gone beyond bilateral relations and harmed third-party interests. In a statement, China's embassy in the US said Beijing will firmly safeguard its national sovereignty and security. Earlier, US President Joe Biden and Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga vowed to work together to ensure a free and open Indo-Pacific. India has logged a record spike in coronavirus-related deaths with more than 1,300 fatalities in the past 24 hours. It also reported the highest increase in cases for the 5th straight day, with nearly 234,000 new infections. Here in Pakistan, the death toll has surpassed 16,000 after 112 deaths were recorded overnight. Nearly 5,000 people tested positive for the virus in the past 24 hours, with the tally crossing 750,000. While globally, the virus has claimed nearly 3 million lives and infected more than 139 million people so far. Well, these were the headlines. News in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. Let's start from Afghanistan, where 11 civilians and Afghan troops have been killed in a series of attacks across the country. According to the government officials, at least 4 civilians were killed in a roadside bomb blast in Kandahar, while 6 soldiers were killed in separate attacks in Faryab, Balkh and Baghdis provinces. The government has blamed the Taliban for the violence. Meanwhile, a statement by the group said nearly 100 civilians were killed or wounded in government's attacks over the past 2 weeks. Violence remains rampant in Afghanistan despite ongoing peace efforts to end the conflict. Now, the US says any terrorist attack on the military drawdown troops or allies in Afghanistan will be met very forcefully. At a news conference, Pentagon spokesperson John Kirby said Washington is well aware of Taliban threats. Kirby said it would be imprudent for the US not to take these threats seriously. He added that it would also be improper for the Taliban to not take seriously what President Joe Biden has made clear. Kirby said there may be some additional enabling capabilities added to Afghanistan for a short time. He said this will help bring about a safe, orderly and deliberately planned drawdown. The press secretary said the US also plans to remove at least some contractors from Afghanistan. Now, in Myanmar, protesters in Yangon Commercial District have welcomed the parallel unity government to confront the military. Myanmar has been in upheaval since the military ousted Aung San Suu Kyi, with the junta killing 728 people. Demonstrators in Yangon continue to call for their New Year strike. Dozens waited for an opportunity between police patrolling to quickly gather in the street. In the ruby mining town of Mogok, security forces shot dead 2 more demonstrators. Meanwhile, the junta chief will attend an Association of Southeast Asian Nation Summit in Indonesia on the 24th of April. A Thai Foreign Ministry spokesperson confirmed Min Aung Hlaing's first known foreign trip since the coup. Now, China says talks between the United States and Japan have gone beyond bilateral relations and harm third-party interest. Earlier, U.S. President Joe Biden and Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga vowed to work together to ensure a free and open Indo-Pacific.
It said Taiwan, Hong Kong and Xinjiang are China's internal affairs and should not be interfered with. Biden met with Suga in his first face-to-face White House summit since taking office. In a joint statement, the two leaders underscored the importance of peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. The statement read, they encouraged a peaceful resolution of cross-strait issues. Later, addressing a think tank, Japanese Prime Minister called for a stable and constructive relationship with China.
Japan's basic policy on pending issues caused by China is to firmly assert what should be asserted and strongly request China to take specific action. At the same time, we must work to establish a stable and constructive relationship with China and keep in close partnership with the United States and other like-minded nations.
The US and Japan also agreed to invest together in areas such as 5G and chip supply chains. Washington pledged $2.5 billion, while Tokyo $2 billion to strengthen digital competitiveness.
Well, now the US says Russia's decision to expel 10 American diplomats is escalatory and regrettable. This comes as Russia told the US diplomats to leave the country after Washington imposed sanctions. A State Department spokesperson said it is not in US interest to get into a escalatory cycle. But the spokesperson said Washington reserves the right to respond to any Russian retaliation. The State Department said US sanctions were proportionate to Russia's harmful activities. Earlier, Moscow also banned 8 high-ranking current and former US officials from entering Russia. Those banned include FBI Director, Director of National Intelligence and US Attorney General. Now, US President Joe Biden has called Iran's uranium enrichment unhelpful for the ongoing nuclear deal's revival talks. In a press briefing, Biden said he is pleased that Iran has continued to agree to engage in discussions on how to move forward. The president said he believes the US should never have gotten out of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. He said it is good that Tehran is engaged in talks over what is needed to allow Washington to return. But he added the US is just not willing to make some concessions. Biden said it's premature to make a judgment on the outcome of the talks. Earlier, an EU representative said Iranian and US envoys will return to their countries for consultations before further talks. Iran says it has identified the person behind the recent explosion at its main Natanz nuclear plant. Iranian Ministry of Intelligence said Reza Karimi was an agent and has fled Iran. The ministry said necessary steps are underway for his arrest and return to Iran through legal channels. The intelligence ministry did not mention which country the agent belongs to. But Iran has accused Israel multiple times of ordering the attack on its critical nuclear infrastructure. Moving on now, the Arab coalition in Yemen says it has intercepted another Houthi drone launched towards the southern southeast city of Jazan. The coalition vowed to take all necessary measures to protect civilians in line with the international law. Pakistan has condemned the attack and reaffirmed support for Riyadh against any threat to its territorial integrity. Meanwhile, a Houthi spokesperson said calls for ceasefire in Yemen are insincere as long as the blockade persists. This comes a day after 96 people died in clashes between coalition forces and the rebels for strategic Marib region. Now, at least 2 Palestinians have been injured in Israeli air raids on the besieged Gaza Strip for the second day in a row. Palestinian media said 3 rockets destroyed several settlements and damaged civilian homes. It said missiles were also fired at an open agricultural land between Rafah and Khan Yunis cities. Meanwhile, the Israeli military said it launched the assault on alleged Hamas targets after a rocket was fired from Gaza. Earlier, the occupying forces injured 11 Palestinians in a crackdown on protesters in West Bank and Jerusalem. Now, the US, EU3 and the UK have condemned the attacks on foreign troops in the Iraqi Kurdistan region. In a joint statement, the five countries said attacks on the US coalition personnel and facilities will not be tolerated. The statement read the US, UK, France, Italy and Germany support Iraq and are committed against ISIS. This comes after US and Turkish forces were targeted in two separate incidents on April 14. Earlier, ISIS formally claimed responsibility for a market bomb attack in Iraq's capital, which cost 4 civilian lives. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says many in the West deliberately indulge in Islamophobia under the guise of free speech. In a tweet, Khan demanded an apology from such extremists for hurting the sentiments of Muslims. But he said the perpetrators lack moral sense and courage to apologize to the Muslims. He said the Western governments that outlawed any negative comment on the Holocaust should penalize Muslim haters similarly. Khan said any disrespect and abuse directed towards the Prophet will not be tolerated. Regarding the recent action against the TLP, Khan said no one is above the law and constitution. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi has arrived in Dubai on a 3-day official visit to the UAE. The foreign officer said the two countries enjoy strong ties rooted in common faith and shared history and values. In a statement, it said Qureshi will discuss bilateral cooperation and regional and global issues of mutual interest with the UAE leadership. The foreign minister will also call on his counterpart, His Highness Sheikh Abdul bin Zayed Al Nahyan. Qureshi will also meet the Pakistani diaspora and interact with local and international media. In Pakistan, Shibli Faraz and Shaukat Tareen have been sworn in as federal ministers by President Arif Alvi in a ceremony held in Islamabad. Faraz will take charge as Minister for Science and Technology, while Tareen will henceforth be Minister for Finance. Prime Minister Imran Khan reshuffled his cabinet and decided to appoint Tareen as the new finance minister. Tareen replaced Federal Minister Hamad Azhar, who was appointed finance minister only a few weeks ago. Meanwhile, Federal Minister Fawad Chowdhury replaced Faraz as Information Minister, while the latter took charge of Science and Technology Ministry. Last month, then Senator Faraz had said that the Premier aimed to reshuffle the cabinet as he wanted to bring in a new team. Still in Pakistan, the death toll from the new coronavirus has crossed the 16,000 mark. This comes after the virus claimed another 102 lives in the past 24 hours. The Health Ministry said nearly 5,000 people tested positive overnight. The caseload has crossed 750,000, out of which nearly 655,000 people have recovered. It said there are more than 79,000 active cases across the country. The ministry added just over 4,100 patients are in critical condition. Meanwhile, Pakistan's envoy to UN has urged for universal vaccination to overcome the pandemic and its fallout. Now, India has logged a record spike in coronavirus-related deaths with more than 1,300 fatalities in the last 24 hours. It also reported the highest increase in cases for the 5th straight day, with nearly 234,000 new infections. Globally, the virus has claimed nearly 3 million lives and infected more than 139 million people so far. More about the pandemic in this report.
While this week saw a record number of COVID-19 cases in many parts of the world, setbacks to vaccination drive also contributed to government's troubles. Chile says China's Sinovac vaccine, CoronaVac, is 67% effective in the first real-world study of the shot. The U.S. drug regulator has revoked emergency authorization of Eli Lilly's monoclonal antibody treatment when used on its own. Meanwhile, 21 U.S. states recorded at least a 10% rise in daily average positive cases.
In concert with the increase in cases, the 7-day average of emergency department visits, hospital admissions, and hospitalizations are all approximately 5 to 8% higher than they were in the prior 7-day period. And sadly, average daily deaths have increased for the 3rd day in a row.
U.S. pharmaceutical company Moderna says it is struggling to supply promised shots to UK because of issues with increasing production at its European plant. Johnson & Johnson has refuted claims that the design of its COVID-19 vaccine may explain why it has been linked to rare brain blood clots. The World Health Organization says the strain that emerged in India can bring about increased transmissibility.
Having two of these mutations, which have been seen in other variants around the world, are concerning because there's a similarity in these mutations that confer increased transmissibility, for example, and some of these mutations also result in reduced neutralization, which may have an impact on our countermeasures, including the vaccines.
The world's largest vaccine maker in India has asked the U.S. president to lift a ban on exporting raw materials needed to make more shots. In Spain, Madrid's public health chief says the shortage of shots may force the region to close down vaccination centers next week.
We'll still have news for you in this news bulletin, but after a short break, stay with us. Britain prepares to bid a final farewell to Prince Philip at a ceremonial funeral today. The Duke of Edinburgh died at the age of 99 last week in Windsor Castle. He was the nation's longest-serving consort and had been married to Queen Elizabeth II for 73 years. The funeral will be a muted affair which will take place at St. George's Chapel. The ceremony will be limited to 30 people, including members of the royal family, due to COVID-19 restrictions. There will be no public procession, and the Queen, who says the death has left a huge void, will sit separately. The order of the service for the funeral was agreed with the Prince during his lifetime and reflects his close military affiliations. Now, Eritrea has publicly acknowledged its presence in Ethiopia's Tigray region for the first time. In a letter to the UN Security Council, Asmara agreed to start withdrawing troops from the area. Asmara's UN envoy, Sophia, said the looming grave threats in Tigray has been largely thwarted. Sophia said Ethiopian contingents will simultaneously be redeployed along the international boundary. She said the priority should be the delivery of aid to civilians in Tigray. Sophia said the allegations of rape and other crimes lodged against Eritrean soldiers are outrageous. The envoy added that it is a vicious attack on the culture and history of Eritrea's people. Now, in the U.S. state of Minnesota, hundreds of protesters have clashed with the police outside Brooklyn Center's police headquarters. Police arrested dozens as the civil unrest over the killing of a young black carried into a sixth consecutive night. Demonstrators threw objects at the officers, who in turn used tear gas and flashbangs. This comes after the former police officer who shot Dawn Wright was charged with second-degree manslaughter, but charges against her have failed to appease protesters, as Wright's family says they fall short of justice. Meanwhile, hundreds of Chicagoans took to the streets in solidarity with the family of Adam Toledo. The 13-year-old boy was shot dead by police on the 29th of March. U.S. President Joe Biden has called for an end to gun violence in the country, calling it a national embarrassment. This comes a day after a shooter killed 8 people and himself at the FedEx Corps facility in Indianapolis. Talking to reporters, he urged Congress to step up and address the issue of gun violence. Biden called for a ban on assault weapons and magazines that hold more than 10 bullets.
This has to end. It's a national embarrassment. It is a national embarrassment what's going on. And it's not only these mass shootings that are occurring. Every single day, there's a mass shooting in the United States, if you count all those who were killed out on the streets of our cities and our rural areas. It's a national embarrassment and must come to an end.
Now, 3 astronauts have returned to Earth from the International Space Station. Russia's Roscosmos Space Agency says they landed in Kazakhstan on the Soyuz MS-17 spacecraft. The spacecraft was carrying NASA astronaut Kate Rubins, the first person to sequence DNA in space. It also brought back home 2 Russian cosmonauts, Sergei Ryzhkov and Sergei Kudferko. The 3 had been at the space station since mid-October 2020. The mission was the last scheduled Russian flight carrying a U.S. crew member. It marks an end to a long dependency as the US revives its own crew launch capability to drive down the cost of sending people into space. Now, NASA has picked Elon Musk's SpaceX to develop the first commercial lander and take the next 2 US astronauts to the moon. The contract is worth $2.9 billion and is part of NASA's Artemis program. NASA picked SpaceX over Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin and defense contractor Dynetics. The agency said the SpaceX Starship will include a spacious cabin and 2 airlocks for moonwalks. NASA's acting administrator Steve Jurczyk said the agency has next landing shot at 2024. On Twitter, SpaceX said it is humbled to help the US Space Agency usher in a new era of human space exploration. Now, in Spain, a school has taken its classes to the beach for some fresh air after congested online learning due to the pandemic. Let's find out more in this report.
Online schooling and the absence of extracurricular activities for over a year has surely put a toll on pupils. However, these Spanish scholars have found a way to escape by taking their classroom to the beach. The classes are conducted on the sandy shores of Playa de los Nietos Beach. The teachers begin preparations at 8 a.m. before the children come and sit over the neatly spaced out green desk rows.
It's something completely amazing. It's completely amazing because the children arrived the next day to school and they like delighted. They feel like they are doing something different from other schools, and then they are asking, when are we going to go again? When are we going to go to the beach again?
Alongside their schoolwork, the children also have fun by running around in the sand and playing the xylophones. The pupils are aged from 3 to 12 and remain in their class bubbles.
People from the village, the fishermen, taught the students how to fish, how to live. They identified the economy that is suffering so much and how they themselves have been able to feed us in the times of pandemic. It is very important for them to know that fish are not in the supermarket, that the fish are in the sea and we have to catch them.
The beach lessons are part of a broader project known as Fresh Air. It aims to create better air quality for children during the ongoing pandemic, including through open-air learning.
The US has removed Vietnam and Switzerland from its currency manipulator list. The Trump administration had labeled the 2 as currency manipulators in December. In its semi-annual report to Congress, the Treasury Department said no country currently meets the US criteria as a manipulator. It said, however, Vietnam and Switzerland, as well as Taiwan, will be under enhanced monitoring. The department said the 3 exceeded its 2015 currency thresholds during the 2020 year. But it said there is insufficient evidence that they are manipulating their exchange rates to gain a trade advantage or prevent a balance of payments adjustments. Now let's have a look at how the weather is doing around the world. And that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News. Take care.